My name is Diane C., and I'm 30 years old, and when I crashed my car, the paramedics called my family. Nobody showed. An hour later, my brother posted, "Road trip with the real crew." I stayed silent. 4 days later, still bruised and bandaged, my phone lit up with 41 missed calls and one request on Venmo. 3,100 for the cabin weekend. Everyone's chipping in. Then a message from Mom. "Call back, it's urgent. We can't fix this without you." I got angry, and the day I crashed my car was the day I finally saw my family for who they really were. I hadn't even planned to be on the road that morning. I was supposed to fly back from Denver after a 3-day client conference, but my brother Luke called me the night before asking if I could send him some money for a weekend cabin trip he wanted to take with our sisters, Aria and Michelle, and a few friends. He made it sound urgent, something about needing to book before midnight or losing the deal. He didn't have enough on his card. Said I'd get paid back by Monday. I didn't even hesitate. I told him I'd cover it again. That's just how it worked with my family. They called, I answered, always. The problem was, the money I sent left me just short for a next-day flight, so I figured I'd drive home through the night instead. I didn't tell anyone that part. No point. They never really asked about the details of my life anyway. I left Denver around midnight. The highways were slick from a light snow that had melted earlier and then frozen over again. About 40 minutes from home, I hit a stretch of black ice near a curve, and that was it. A semi ahead of me lost control, jackknifed across the road. I tried to brake, swerved left too hard. The wheels lost grip. I spun, hit the guardrail, then flipped. The airbag saved me probably, but it felt like my insides had been crushed. I remember the metallic taste in my mouth, my ears ringing, paramedics pulling me out through the passenger side. They cut off my jacket. I asked if the truck driver was okay, but I don't remember their answer. Everything blurred. I passed out. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Tubes in my arm for fluids, ribs cracked, wrist fractured, arm stitched. The whole right side of my body felt like it had been worked over with a hammer. The nurse told me I was lucky, said I'd probably be kept for observation a few more days. I asked if anyone had come. She checked the chart, said the paramedics called all my emergency contacts at the scene. Messages were left. Still, no one showed. I waited. I stared at the ceiling for hours, checking my phone every few minutes. Battery down to 12%. No texts, no missed calls. Then, around 9:30 a.m., my brother posted on Instagram. Photo of him, my sisters Aria and Michelle, and my parents crammed into the SUV, holding up energy drinks, grinning like they were about to hit Coachella. The caption said, "Road trip with the real crew." It had been posted less than an hour after my crash. I read it 3 times, kept checking the timestamp, thinking maybe it had been posted earlier and just refreshed. It wasn't. They knew. They knew I'd been in a crash. They knew where I was, and they left anyway. Packed up and hit the road like I didn't exist. And that's when something inside me changed. Not with fireworks, not with rage, just a snap, like a rope pulled too tight, finally giving way. For years, I'd been the one holding everything together. I was the fallback, the helper, the one who paid for the family beach rentals, the college textbooks, the emergency dental work. I'd send money for bills one week and cover a vacation the next. They always said thank you, but never asked how I was doing. I didn't even expect it anymore. I just kept giving. And when I needed someone, not for money, not for help, just to be there, they weren't. They chose a cabin weekend over their daughter and sister in a hospital bed. I stayed silent. I didn't respond to the post, didn't message anyone, just lay there bruised and bandaged, letting it settle. I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would reach out later. They didn't. Not that day, not the next, not until 4 days later when my phone lit up with 41 missed calls and a Venmo request for 3,100 labeled cabin weekend. Everyone's chipping in. Everyone's. And right under that, a message from my mom. "Call back. It's urgent. We can't fix this without you." That was the moment I stopped being their safety net, and I haven't looked back since. My boyfriend, Ethan, called while I was still staring at the screen. His voice was tight, like he'd been holding his breath for days. He asked where I'd been, why I hadn't answered, and then he heard me inhale and he went quiet. I didn't tell him everything at once. I couldn't. I just said, "I'm in the hospital. The silence on the line turned heavy. Then he said my name like he was trying to pull me closer through the phone. He asked why he wasn't the first call, why nobody was with me. And I almost lied, out of habit, out of shame, out of that old instinct to protect my family's image, even when they were the ones who left me bleeding alone. But I didn't. I told him the paramedics called my family. I told him nobody came. I told him about the post. I told him about the Venmo request. Ethan didn't say anything for a second. Then he said, "Diane, this isn't a misunderstanding. This is who they are." I didn't cry. I didn't even feel surprised. I felt clear. Clear in a way that hurt more than tears, because clarity means you can't pretend anymore. Later that night, while the hospital lights hummed and my ribs throbbed every time I moved, my phone buzzed again. Another notification, a message request from someone I hadn't thought about in months. It was Ethan's ex-girlfriend, Chloe. It was short, polite, almost sweet. "Hey, Diane, Ethan mentioned you've been going through something. Just wanted to say I hope you're okay." My stomach tightened, because it wasn't just concern, it was timing. And my family had a talent for sensing weak points in other people's relationships and pressing until they bled. I stared at Chloe's message until the screen dimmed. Then I set the phone down and looked up at the ceiling. I realized something else in that moment. My family wasn't going to call because they were worried I might not wake up. They were going to call because the machine that kept their lives comfortable had stopped responding. And when they realized I wasn't coming back to my old role, they weren't going to accept it quietly. They were going to fight for their access to me. I didn't respond. Not to the Venmo request, not to the missed calls, not to the message from my mom that said it was urgent and they couldn't fix this without me. I just stared at my phone while lying in a hospital bed with my ribs taped and my wrist wrapped, realizing she wasn't calling because something had happened to me. She was calling because something had gone wrong for them. That night, a nurse came in to check my vitals and asked if I had someone who'd be staying with me. I said no before she finished the sentence. She nodded like she'd heard that answer before and tucked the blanket tighter around my shoulders. When the lights dimmed, I slept better than I had in years. Not because I wasn't in pain, but because I wasn't waiting anymore. They discharged me the next morning. The doctor asked if I had a ride home. I didn't even pretend to check my phone. I ordered a rideshare and let the driver talk the entire way while I watched the city slide past the window. Everything looked normal out there. People walking dogs, coffee shops opening, life moving on. Meanwhile, my world had just cracked open. My apartment felt different when I stepped inside. Too quiet, too clean. Like a place I hadn't really seen in years because I was always running back out to solve someone else's problem. I dropped my bag by the door and sat on the couch without taking my coat off, still wearing the hospital wristband. I stared at the wall for 10 minutes, feeling every bruise settle into my body. And yet, the thing that hurt the most wasn't physical. It was the silence from the people I'd spent my life protecting. The next morning, I made a list. Not dramatic, not angry, just honest. 2 columns on a legal pad. Left column. Every monthly payment I made for someone in my family. My mom's medication. My dad's half of the mortgage. Aria's graduate school loan. Michelle's car lease. Luke's temporary credit card debt that I'd been covering for 19 months. Subscription services. Utilities. Netflix. Gym memberships. Everything. I added it up. $2,780 a month. And that was just the recurring expenses. Right column, the names of people who had checked in while I was in the hospital. 3 names. My grandmother, who called every night once she found out. Uncle Keith, who offered to drive across state lines to pick me up if I needed help. And Brian, a coworker I barely spoke to outside of meetings, who sent a voice message saying if I needed food, he'd have some dropped off. No questions asked. No one else. Not my mom, not my dad, not my sisters, not Luke. I sat with the list for a long time. Then I opened my banking app. I didn't send messages. I didn't announce anything. I just started canceling. 1 automatic transfer at a time. I shut off every payment. I unsubscribed them from everything they didn't pay for themselves. I removed myself from shared family plans. I canceled the cable at my parents' house. Ended Michelle's gym membership. Pulled the plug on the electric bill Luke had conveniently forgotten was in my name. It took less than 20 minutes. That afternoon, Luke messaged again. Said the cabin trip had gone a little over budget and that I probably missed the Venmo request. He added a laughing emoji like this was some inside joke between us. Said he'd appreciate the payment soon, just so everyone's even. I left it on red. An hour later, Michelle called. I ignored it. Then Aria. Then my mom. Then my dad. 10 missed calls by dinner. The next morning, my mom texted, "What's going on? You know we've always been there for each other." I stared at that message longer than I should have. Not because I was confused, but because I finally understood something they never had to think about. They believed that. They genuinely thought this whole arrangement had been equal, that me constantly putting out fires while they moved through life was just family helping family. They didn't need me. They needed what I gave them, and now they didn't have it. For the first time in my life, they were going to have to figure things out on their own, and I was going to sit back and watch. It took less than 48 hours for the cracks to show. Luke was the first one to break. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from him like nothing had happened. "Hey, can you spot me 150 until Friday?" No apology, no concern, just muscle memory, like my silence was a glitch he expected me to fix. I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, another text came through. "Okay, seriously, did I do something? Just let me know." Still nothing from me. By that evening, the tone changed. Aria sent a group text. "We need to talk. This family's falling apart." As if I was the glue that had stopped sticking. As if the entire structure hadn't been rotting for years, and my silence was the thing finally exposing it. Michelle called next. This time she left a voicemail. Her voice was calm, a little too calm, like she'd practiced it. She said she wasn't sure what was going on, but hoped I knew how much everyone loved me. She ended it with the phrase I'd heard my whole life. "We'll figure it out like always." That was the sentence that did it. Because yes, we always figured it out. But by we, they meant me. I figured it out when my dad's business nearly folded and I took a second job to cover their mortgage. I figured it out when Aria totaled her car and needed a replacement to finish school. I figured it out when Michelle wanted to study abroad and couldn't miss the opportunity. I was always the fix, not the sister, not the daughter, just the solution. 2 days later, my mom sent a long message filled with passive lines about how she didn't understand why I was punishing them and how this wasn't how families treated each other. She didn't mention the crash. She didn't mention the hospital. She didn't ask if I was healing. She was frustrated that I was changing. That's when the money problems started surfacing. Michelle's car payment bounced. She texted me screenshots of the overdue notice, said she thought there was a mistake with the automatic transfer. I didn't reply. Aria emailed me, not texted, emailed, asking if I could please reinstate the loan payment just for this month. She framed it as temporary. It always was. Then came my dad. He called 3 times in a row. When I didn't answer, he left a voicemail. His voice wasn't angry or confused. It was tired. He said the mortgage payment hadn't gone through, and if something had changed, I should have been adult enough to say so. Adult enough. Where was that conversation 4 days earlier when I was bleeding in a trauma ward? That's when it hit me. They weren't sorry. They weren't reaching out because they'd realized what they'd done. They were reaching out because their comfort had been interrupted. It wasn't me they missed. It was the version of me that always said yes. Then they escalated. I started getting calls from numbers I didn't recognize. At first I thought they were spam. Then I realized Aria had given my number to one of her classmates. She wanted them to help talk some sense into me. Michelle had her friend message me on Instagram saying I was hurting everyone. Luke posted a vague story about how some people only show their true colors when they stop being needed. It was surreal, like they'd all agreed I was broken because I'd stopped playing my role. Ethan watched all of it from the outside. He didn't push. He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed close, made sure I ate, reminded me to take my meds on time. One night he said quietly, "They're panicking because you're not reachable anymore." He was right. Then my phone rang with a name that made my chest soften instead of tighten. My grandmother. She asked how I was healing. Told me she had soup in the freezer if I wanted it. She didn't ask about the money, didn't mention the fallout, just wanted to know if I needed anything. Uncle Keith did the same. He sent a prepaid grocery delivery and told me to rest. The contrast was blinding. That's when I felt it, not just anger, power. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being used. I wasn't being manipulated. I was in control of who got access to me. And one by one, the doors were closing. The panic from my family was just beginning. And I wasn't even close to done. By the end of that week, I stopped counting the missed calls. They weren't slowing down. They were multiplying. Michelle called 10 times in one morning. Aria emailed again, this time copying my dad. Luke tagged me in an old photo on Facebook with the caption, "Family sticks together, even when it's hard." It was like they were all trying to bait a reaction. Any reaction. I gave them none. Instead, I focused on something they hadn't remembered yet, the family business. My dad started it years ago, a mid-sized remodeling company that stayed afloat because I kept the books clean, negotiated supplier contracts, handled permits, licensing, and every quiet emergency that would have sunk it if someone competent hadn't stepped in. My parents were the faces. My siblings had titles, but behind the scenes, it was me. 5 years earlier, when my dad needed a personal loan and couldn't get one from the bank, I stepped in. I co-signed at first. Then quietly, the structure changed. The LLC transferred into my name. He never read the fine print. He trusted me, and I trusted him enough to never use it against him. Until now. I didn't make a dramatic announcement. I logged into the back-end systems, paused accounts payable, revoked admin access for every family member, and updated the website with a single line. Operations paused under restructure. Then I emailed the suppliers directly, electricians, drywall crews, cabinet wholesalers. I told them payments would resume shortly under a new structure, professional, calm, clean, no blame, no emotion. The fallout didn't take long. By the next afternoon, my dad called 7 times in a row. Then my mom. She left a voicemail that wasn't angry. It was panicked. She said the team had shown up for a job site that morning and no one could access the client files. A supplier was calling about a hold. She ended with, "What's happening? Please, this isn't like you." But it was exactly like me, just not the version they were used to. 2 hours later, I got an unexpected call from my cousin Kyle. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. He was always the quiet one at gatherings, never involved himself in family drama. He said, "Hey, I know things are messy right now, but good for you. Seriously." I asked him what he meant. He told me something that settled heavy in my chest. Apparently, Luke had posted a story on the way to the cabin. A short clip in the car. In the background, Arya laughed and said, "Well, she's in the hospital. What are we supposed to do? Sit around and cry?" Then laughter. Kyle saw it before it was deleted. So did a few people in the extended family. I sat with that for a long time. I'd told myself their absence was ignorance, that maybe they didn't understand how bad the crash was. But that video stripped that illusion away. They didn't just leave me, they mocked it. The next morning, I finalized the change. The company would continue, but without them. I filed paperwork to update the official address, froze payroll access for everyone except myself, and scheduled a meeting with the small crew I trusted. The ones who showed up. The ones who worked without shortcuts. I offered them contracts. Better ones. The kind I used to reserve for family. I didn't explain myself to my parents or my siblings. I didn't need to. The silence was doing that for me. That evening, Luke sent one last message. "You're overreacting. You're going to burn the whole family down over one bad weekend." I didn't reply. Because it wasn't one bad weekend. It was every single time they asked me to carry something they didn't want to hold themselves. And the first time I needed them, they chose a cabin and a joke. They still didn't understand what was happening, but they were about to learn. The fallout came fast, but it wasn't loud. It was the kind of unraveling that happens quietly, behind closed doors, where panic seeps in before anyone admits it out loud. I didn't go looking for updates, but they kept finding me anyway. Contractors I'd worked with for years forwarded me frantic messages from my dad. His tone swung wildly, one moment polite, the next threatening, demanding access, claiming there had to be some mistake. Some of the guys just laughed and sent me screenshots. One of them wrote, "Didn't know your dad was like this. Thought you handled all the real stuff." He wasn't wrong. Luke took a different route. He started posting vague stories online. One showed the company van parked crooked at the edge of the driveway with the caption, "When you give your whole life to something just to get blindsided." Like I hadn't kept him employed through at least 5 failed career phases. The last job he'd had before working for the family business lasted 6 weeks. I helped him get that one too. Arya tried again, softer this time. She messaged me late one night, said she knew things were weird, but hoped I could front her tuition just one last time. She promised she'd talk to Mom, that everyone was ready to apologize. She added, "We were just overwhelmed during the trip. No one knew how serious your crash was." I didn't respond, because I'd seen the video. I hadn't told anyone Kyle mentioned it, but someone else had saved it. A screen recording that circulated briefly in the extended family chat before it disappeared. Arya laughing, Luke filming. Someone in the background saying my name like it was a punchline. They didn't misunderstand. They dismissed me. Then my mom showed up, alone. She didn't call ahead. She just rang the buzzer around 8 that night. I saw her on the security feed standing there with a soft grocery bag and a tin of food, the way she used to show up after parent-teacher nights when she wasn't sure what version of me she was walking into. I almost didn't let her in. My ribs still ached. I was tired. But curiosity won. I buzzed her up. She stepped inside and didn't say anything at first. She set the bag on the counter like muscle memory, like feeding me had always been the same as loving me. Then she finally said she wasn't there to talk me into anything. She just didn't want my freezer to be empty. We stood there in silence. Then she asked, "Are you really going to leave us behind for good?" I looked at her and said the truth calmly. "I already did. You just didn't notice." She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer, but hoped I'd say something else. Then she picked up her purse and left. For a moment, I thought that might be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, I got a letter, a real one, my name handwritten on the envelope. It was from my grandmother. Inside was a short note. "You did the right thing, even if it feels heavy. I've been watching this for years. I knew it would come to this eventually. Just don't forget to leave space for peace when you're ready." Taped to the bottom was a folded check for $3,100, the exact amount they'd asked me for the cabin weekend. I didn't cash it. I still haven't. I kept it because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone, and that mattered more than money ever did. By the third week, the noise stopped. At first, I thought it was another pause, one of those guilt-soaked silences that comes before a new wave of manipulation. But this one felt different. It wasn't strategy, it was surrender. They finally understood I wasn't coming back. Luke was the first to fall all the way through. He picked up a night shift at a fulfillment center off the freeway. One of the drywall guys I still worked with told me Luke had said it was just temporary, a placeholder. But I knew better. Temporary was a word my family used when they didn't want to admit something had ended. Arya quietly pulled out of grad school. She posted online about taking a mental health break, framed it like a choice instead of a consequence. One of her old professors reached out to me for a recommendation, not knowing what had happened. I didn't respond, not out of spite, out of honesty. Michelle sold her car and moved back in with my parents. They told people it was just for a little while, the kind of little while that turns into a year. The business stabilized without them, smaller, cleaner, healthier. I kept the crew who showed up, who worked hard, who didn't expect shortcuts just because they shared a last name with someone. I handed field operations to 2 guys I trusted and focused on strategy and finance, the parts I'd always loved but never had time for because I was too busy fixing everyone else's mess. Offers started coming in, consulting work, opportunities I'd never pursued because I was busy propping up a family that didn't know how to stand on its own. My mom tried one last time. A text came through on a Sunday night around 9. She said she'd been thinking about everything, said it was strange not hearing from me, said family dinners weren't the same, and asked if I'd consider stopping by one day soon. I stared at the message for a long time, not because I was tempted, but because I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no guilt, just a stillness I hadn't known before, like standing outside a house I used to live in and realizing it had never really felt like home. I didn't answer. The next morning, I bought a plane ticket to Oregon, a place I'd always wanted to visit but never had time for. I rented a small cabin by myself, surrounded by trees, fog, and silence so complete it felt like a reset. No favors, no obligations, no one asking for anything. For the first time, I existed for myself, not as a safety net, not as a bank, not as the responsible one who always figured it out. Just me. I still talk to my grandmother. I still see Uncle Keith when I can. They never bring up the family split. They don't need to. They watched it happen slowly for years, just like I did. My grandmother still sends cards sometimes. Sometimes with notes. Sometimes with checks she knows I won't cash. Just gestures that say, "I see you." People love to say family is everything, but they never talk about what happens when your family is the thing holding you back, when love comes with conditions, when loyalty only flows one way. I had to crash, literally, to finally see it. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not waiting for apologies. I'm not hoping for change. They have their lives. I have mine. The difference is I built mine on truth and peace. They built theirs on borrowed time, and I'm no longer the one paying for it.